Okay. There is a slight difference between the readings in the King James Version and the one I was preparing this from, and I would be interested to look it up in Greek, but I don't have the time right now. Um, in the gospel reading in the NRSV, it's the Son of Man and not the Son of God, which is relevant further down the road in my discussion. I have not prepared my sermon in Jacobean speech. You'll have to put up with my modern diction. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. I've always liked stories where something secret or unexpected is revealed, causing different characters to have to recalculate everything from the ground up. We can call it just a twist in the story, I guess, but at their most interesting, the consequences of such a change are bigger than just an alteration of external circumstance, and more challenging than one might initially expect. Whether in real life or in fiction, it's often fun and usually at least interesting to watch it play out. It's a little like the narrative version of a Rube Goldberg contraption, or maybe just a spreadsheet where you can tweak some value over here in one cell and have lots of other cells over there change values based on that initial new value. External situations may turn out to be different from what you initially expected. More important, people may manifest unexpected depths. The most interesting of these, I think, are those cases where a character turns out to be someone different from what we were expecting. The Arabian Nights recounts Harun al-Rashid, the Caliph of Baghdad, wandering the streets incognito and coming to know the hearts and minds of his subjects. A similar anonymous progress of the king appears later with Henry V in Shakespeare's play of the same name. Characters with hidden identities of a more extreme nature, Superman, Batman, a host of others in the superhero line, are similar too. Usually they're hidden and eventually come to light. So when the people holding the secrets are just clever humans, these can be fun, and they can range from the silly to the profound. But when it's God who discloses the unexpected, it's usually more than just amusing. It's often at least a warning not to take what we think we know about either people or situations for granted. That advice is timely on all occasions, perhaps because we don't know nearly as much as we think we know most of the time, whereas God does. Today, the lessons offer two distinct examples of this revelation of the unexpected. The first is the story of Samuel's anointing of David for the first time, while the second is partial and more complex, a part of the unfolding manifestation of Jesus as the Messiah. The long-term story of Samuel has already had several layers of surprise twist. You may recall the calling of the boy Samuel, which has a regular place in our Eucharistic lectionary. Samuel, himself a surprise child to Hannah, has been dedicated to the service of God in the shrine of Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant is being kept. He is ministering particularly under the priesthood of Eli, who has been tolerating things he ought to have been dealing with. Accordingly, God has determined to replace him and punish his wayward sons. One night, Samuel is lying in his bed trying to get some sleep when he's called repeatedly by God. The first few times he runs to Eli, thinking that he's the one who's been calling, but Eli sends him back to bed. Eventually, Eli realizes that the Lord is calling Samuel and tells him just to stay where he is, but to answer, "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears." Samuel receives the bad news that the family of Eli is being doomed to destruction. When Eli asks the next morning what God has had to say to him, Samuel is initially reluctant to answer, but Eli insists. Fortunately, Eli realizes that he's the one to blame, and he doesn't take it out on Samuel. Some while later, the armies of Israel are fighting with the Philistines, and the Ark of the Covenant is captured, and the sons of Eli are killed. Hearing of these twin calamities, Eli himself dies, and Samuel eventually takes his place. Later, after the rise of Saul as the first king of Israel, Samuel again has to face the problem of conveying or acting on unwelcome news. In today's reading, the stakes, at least politically, have gotten bigger. Saul has not become a better king with age. He's become more fickle and faithless, and is now on the outs with God. Samuel again has to be the bearer of bad tidings, and there's good reason to believe that Saul, unlike Eli, will not accept his reproof in good part, but will, as they say, be inclined to shoot the messenger. While Samuel is not very good at deceptive coloration yet, the Lord has a plan. He tells Samuel to go to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem, and there to conduct a sacrifice as a kind of cover. His real purpose for being there is to find Jesse's among Jesse's several sons, one among Jesse's several sons, and anoint him to be the next king. Anointing has to do with many of the things we mentioned last week in our discussion of the holy and holiness. It's a matter of providing an outward and visible sign, in other words, effectively a sacrament, for something that is inward and not necessarily visible and obvious. When he first arrives, he's greeted with some anxiety by the Bethlehemites and Jesse's household. It's not entirely clear whether this is just because he's a very prominent guy whom you wouldn't expect to show up in your neighborhood, unless something was wrong, or because he already has a reputation of being a bringer of bad news. The first thing they ask is whether he's come in peace. He assures them that he has. He sanctifies them, an interesting point that's not elaborated in detail, and invites them to the sacrifice. At that point, the wheel turns again. He asks to see the sons of Jesse, and of course he does not find the one he's looking for. He goes through the whole lineup of sons, one after another, and rejects each in turn. Exactly what he's looking for, or how he's to recognize it, is never 100% clear in the narrative, but the Lord is apparently whispering into his ear, so to speak, saying no to one after another. So, having run out of candidates without finding an acceptable one, he asks whether that's really all the sons Jesse has. Jesse admits that there's one more, but he's just a little guy who's attending the sheep. This is, of course, David. Samuel demands that he be brought, and of course, when he shows up, he really is a little guy who, while charming, doesn't cut a very impressive figure of the sort people might well be looking for. David is not a powerful man of war. It later turns out he's really pretty good with a sling, however, and that comes into play with the encounter with Goliath. Samuel, with God's guidance, is able to recognize that, despite his outward limitations, David's the one, and so anoints him as the next king of Israel. David does not immediately replace Saul, but from this point on, Saul's doom is pretty well sealed. We are told that from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David. This may recall the discussion we had a few weeks ago about soul and spirit. Pardon me. The Spirit of the Lord is something that can come into or upon someone, empowering him or her, and it's a good deal more important than the obvious marks of leadership. Much of the remainder of the book is in fact a discussion of the deeds of David, how he has embodied the Spirit of the Lord, and how he occasionally bobbles things rather badly. The Gospel reading from John is somewhat more complicated, and the picture it gives us is incomplete. It does not proclaim the fullness of Christ's mission, but it does provide a partial discussion of how he is slowly being revealed for who he is, that is, the Messiah. One can often hear or read about the messianic mystery in the Gospel of Mark. Gospel scholars have explored how Mark covers up critical pieces in establishing Jesus' identity as the Messiah, only to have the truth come into focus more or less at the end. Here in the Gospel of John, however, the strategy appears somewhat different. We are shown less concealment, but rather a slow and incremental revelation of Jesus as the Messiah. More importantly, perhaps, it's a revelation to a select company at first. Much of the first part of John is involved in laying out the signs, showing that Jesus is who we ultimately claim him to be. But these manifestations are often partial and oblique, far from obvious. In the short term, they appear to be revelations to some, but not to others. In this particular story, he's caught between Jewish traditional piety and the objective manifestation of the power of the Lord. It's a bit of a psychological study in reactions. To those who are heavily invested in the traditional modes of piety, he appears to be an offense. Surely he's done a miracle, but hey, he's done it on the Sabbath. Doesn't that break the rules? Surely, they argue, nobody who breaks the rules like that can be of God. On the other hand, to those who are down and out, who have suffered real hardship and then seen the manifest power of the Lord, he's a revelation of something bigger and more important than a pietistic tradition. Sure, he's done this on the Sabbath, but hey, it's a miracle. Nobody has ever done anything like this before. Surely that supersedes the rules about working on the Sabbath. It's God work that he's about, after all, isn't it? Does there need to be any more justification about it than that? Ultimately, the last half of the gospel reading is a fairly careful unpacking of these things. There's an inversion of the classic themes of blindness and sight. Those who claim to be or have been blind are the ones who ultimately come to understand. And in this story, the first person to whom Jesus reveals the full truth about himself is the man born blind. To him, but not to the others, he proclaims that he is the Son of Man. And this is where it differs from the KJV version, which is a kind of circumlocution for the Messiah, inherited at least one point from at least one pointed reference in the book of Daniel. In fact, this is the most common way for Jesus to refer to himself, but it's a point of some contention. The phrase can, as some Bible scholars are eager to point out, mean nothing more than human being. I don't question their expertise on this point as a matter of Hebrew, but I question its relevance. It's fine, I think, but in the larger semantic universe of discourse, it's not a satisfactory explanation for what it means here. For anyone to go around identifying himself to all comers as a human being and nothing more would, I think, qualify him for a place in the loony bin. Yes, you're a human, we get it. So what? So am I, aren't we all? I don't think he's just saying, hey, I'm a man. A man as opposed to what? So even if that's all the phrase originally means, in the context of Daniel 7, it assumes a larger and pointedly prophetic meaning. In verses 13 and 14 of that chapter, we find that chapter of Daniel. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Alas, the NRSV, which we normally use for our lectionary, though we didn't do so today, has obscured this reference in Daniel by rendering it as, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven. Is it wrong? No, it's strictly not wrong. Does it massively miss the point? Yes, it certainly does. Pardon me. The passage in Daniel, which would have been familiar to many among the more learned leaders of the Hebrews at the time, is the anchor for all those other references that Jesus, especially in John's account, uses of himself. What Jesus is saying here is both revelation and concealment, therefore. These are a matched pair of things that in any kind of story, please understand that by calling it a story, I'm not impugning its historical veracity, merely noting that it is an organized account that has reached us in a certain form. What is concealed is almost always the object of some eventual revelation. Put the other way around, only something that hasn't been generally known can be the subject of any kind of revelation. I mentioned earlier that I'm particularly intrigued by those narratives where something is revealed that makes everything clear. Even more, though, I'm intrigued by those disclosures that might well have been obvious all along had one just paid attention to it or interpreted things in a different way. I'm particularly fond of those situations that show up in Shakespeare, but also in other ancient and oracular texts, where a given phrase or passage can be interpreted in different ways. Usually the wrong-headed and usually entitled people wind up missing the point, while the ones who are considered inferior are likelier to get it. In ancient historical literature, the oracle at Delphi was famous for its ambiguities. It reportedly told Croesus that if he waged war on Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus missed the point until too late, that the one it was going to destroy would be his own. Similarly, as reported in Latin sources, it advised Pyrrhus of Epirus, Io te iacida Romanos vincere posse, which he happily interpreted as, I tell you, descendant of Aeacus, that you will be able to conquer the Romans. Unfortunately, the construction for indirect statement in Latin requires the accusative case for the subject and the object, which may not mean anything to you, but what it does mean is that it could also be taken as, and should have been taken as, I tell you, son of Aeacus, that the Romans can conquer you. This may, of course, have been just a case of the oracle hedging its bets, but it's a clever way to do it. Either interpretation is a valid grammatical reading of the sentence. Oops. Pyrrhus won the battle, got clobbered in the long run, whence the phrase Pyrrhic victory, a victory so costly that it destroys the victor in the process. I really think this is one of the things that's going on here, too. Jesus identifies himself as the Son of Man, and I cannot help thinking that to tell the man born blind that he's a human being is neither very interesting or very important. Yeah, duh. Everyone you've encountered and everyone you're able to see, you know that you have your sight, is a human. Is Jesus really just saying, do you believe in a human? I tell you that you've seen him and I am he. Does that even make sense in context? This is meaningful only if we take it in the elevated sense we get from Daniel. Jesus is identifying himself to the man born blind, one of the rejects of society, as the one promised in Daniel. To the highly placed, he is just a human being. To those who believe they are not blind, are systematically, and perhaps as a consequence, unable to recognize their blindness. Which includes the last layer in this unfolding narrative. Forgive me for importing classical parallels, but it's my line of work after all, and stories work similarly across sectarian bounds. In the backstory, the one Greek tragedy that most people read in high school, Oedipus, commonly known as Rex, is heir to a horrific prophecy that he will kill his father and marry his mother. His parents have attempted to forestall the fulfillment of that prophecy by trying to kill him in infancy, but that doesn't work out. He's raised elsewhere. In this, he hears about the prophecy, but not about his parents, and also tries to forestall it from his own end. In the process, he manages to reverse their connivance by fleeing his home in Corinth and returns, in fact, to Thebes, where he was really born. He believes that he's clear-sighted and that he's done the clever thing and, metaphorically speaking, dodged the bullet. But more arrogant, outwitted the gods. He kills his father on the way, and after solving the riddle of the Sphinx, is given the queen, not yet recognized as mom, to marry. When he calls the blind prophet Tiresias to help explain why there's a plague in Thebes, he gets from the old man unwelcome hints that it's his own fault. Like other people in power in all ages, he's inclined to shoot the messenger, or at least dismiss the account as fake news. Then, in an excess of dramatic irony, Oedipus mocks him for being blind. Tiresias's rejoinders are veiled but clear enough to those who know where the story is headed. What he says runs along the lines of, if you only knew how blind you are yourself, you wouldn't be saying this kind of thing to me. This is more or less the place where the story of the Pharisees ends too. They are the truly blind ones, and they are effectively blind not because of some disabilities that has befallen them, but because they choose not to see what there is to be seen. Some of them say to Jesus, surely we are not blind, are we? Jesus says to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. Some of this seems almost too timely today, and I will leave the application as an exercise for you to pursue on your own. Let me merely leave with the thought that one of the most useful phrases in the world, and the one that comes most unwillingly to the lips of the arrogant, is, I don't know. It's actually pretty useful. It articulates an essential truth about most things, since we really know a good deal less than we think we do. It encourages humility, and that can almost never go wrong, if only because being willing to admit that you don't have everything figured out will almost invariably put you in a better position to listen to God and hear Him speak to you.